Welcome to the Value Pros Show, where Value Pros get value ready. Welcome to another episode of the Value Pros Show. I'm your host, Bruce Scheer, and today we have an incredible conversation lined up. Joining me is none other than Kelly Wright, a powerhouse in sales and go-to-market leadership with an impressive career that includes scaling Tableau from its early days to a billion-dollar IPO, and also leading strategic initiatives as the immediate past president at Gong. Today, she's joining us as the founder of Culture-Driven Sales, a firm dedicated to creating alignment between company missions, cultures, and go-to-market strategies. Kelly's here to share her insights on the power of storytelling in sales and how it can transform the way you connect with buyers, building trust, and ultimately closing more deals. So grab your coffee so you can try your best to match Kelly's incredible energy, get comfortable, and let's dive in. So here we are today chatting with Kelly Breslin Wright about the power of stories. To help us get in the mood and talking about stories, Kelly, would you mind giving us your story, if you would, just to kick us off?
Bruce, first of all, just thank you so much for having me today. What a fun opportunity to chat with you again and to be able to share stories back and forth. So what is my story? Well, it's hard to know how far back to go, but I'll just give you kind of my abbreviated life story. I actually started, when we think about stories, I fell in love with sales and stories when I was in college. I was looking for a summer job, and I decided to do this crazy summer job where I sold educational books door to door, ran my own business selling educational books door to door. And I did this for 4 summers. And over the 4 summers in college, I sat down with over 12,000 families in their houses to talk about kids' school and education. And what I found was, one, I loved doing something that was impactful. I loved being able to help solve people's challenges and problems. But most importantly, it was just so fun for me to hear everyone's unique story. And that's when I really fell in love with sales and entrepreneurship. And so that goes all the way back to when I was in college. If I walk through my career after selling books, I worked for Dale Carnegie Training, and I actually sold sales training. I sold public speaking training. After that, I sold residential mortgages at Bank of America. So sold all kinds of things, sold books, sold training, sold mortgages and financial services. And then I ended up going back to business school. I went to Wharton for business school and thought, well, if I want to be an entrepreneur or a business leader, I should understand more about all the different components of business. So I worked for a while in strategic consulting at McKinsey and then at Bain and Company. But then I decided sales is really my jam. That's what I really love to do. So in the internet boom, I left consulting. I went and worked for this small technology startup called Ad Hoc, where I was running sales and client services for a while. And then I ended up going to this little known startup right when it was getting started. I was employee number 10 and the first salesperson 1 month before we launched version 1 of this company called Tableau. And I was at Tableau running all sales as executive vice president of sales and chief revenue officer from basically zero in revenue till almost $1 billion through the IPO. And I'm sure we'll end up talking about some of that time because that was when we were really using stories in building our sales market and sales motion. After Tableau, I did a bunch of board work, and one of the boards actually asked me to come back to be chief operating officer and president. So that was Gong. So I ended up having some time at Gong. And now I'm really spending time on my own business venture, which is called Culture-Driven Sales, which I founded as a way to help other companies and other individuals really build their go-to-market motion.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your background and that's personal story, Kelly. Really love it. And Tableau, I'm so honored, that I had the opportunity to work with you and your fantastic team at Tableau. Not when you were employee number 10. I don't know when what you were employee of at that point in time, but we did, gosh dang, I was
And, Bruce, it's funny that we're talking about stories because that's how you and I met, because
that's
we
right.
brought you and your team in to help us really finesse and figure out how to tell our own unique Tableau story in a way where it was captivating, it was emotionally connecting, it was differentiated. And so you are a pro at storytelling, and so I just feel honored to be able to talk about it with you because 'cause you're one of
Yeah,
the
so
key members
fun.
of it.
Yeah, no, love it, love it. So Kelly, that's a wonderful background of how you got to where you are today. But could you tell us about culture-driven sales? What's the story behind this new firm of yours?
Yeah, well, Bruce, everything starts with mission and vision of a company. And so product and the service is important, of course, but how do you engage with customers, attract your prospects, tell your unique story? It all comes back to the company's purpose and the why. And this threads back to stories. So I'll communicate this with the story as I always talk in stories myself. So when I was finished my time at Tableau and I knew I wanted to do some board work and I wanted to do some speaking, I decided that I would meet with a bunch of founders and heads of sales and CEOs so that I could understand how I could be the most valuable when people thought about sales and go to market. So in that first maybe 18 months after my time at Tableau, this is back in 2016, 2017, I met with over 100 founders and CEOs. And most of these were in hyper growth tech, but they were in all different sectors and all different size companies, public companies, private companies. And I was meeting these CEOs because I would meet them at a CEO summit, at a go to market or a sales seminar. Oftentimes, companies were calling and had questions if I could help them with consulting or whatever it may be. So I was asking, well, what's your biggest challenge in sales and go to market? And oftentimes companies would say, or the CEO would say, well, our sales and marketing team's not aligned. Or our sales team is trying to sell something that's different than what our product team is building. Or we're just not on the same page. We just don't have alignment. And so it gave me this epiphany, and I started asking these questions of to the CEO, well, what's your mission? What's your mission and what's your company purpose? And it was very interesting. First of all, not everyone even had a mission, and not everyone could even tell me what their story was. But even if they had a mission, oftentimes their mission wouldn't match the words of what their mission was on their website. Or on their website, they'd have something on their own page and something else on their hiring page and something else on their about page. And then I'd start asking, well, can I talk to the different executives on your team? And maybe the CEO would have a different answer to what their mission and story was to the co founder. And that was a different answer to the head of product and a different answer to the sales team. And I was just scratching my head of, well, of course you're not going to have alignment if you go to a company and the executive team is telling different stories about who they are and why they exist. How in the world are your salespeople and your marketers and how are your employees gonna understand what you're doing? And how are your customers gonna even understand what you're about? And so I decided, okay, I need to actually put together this understanding and framework that is you have to have an integrated umbrella go-to-market strategy, which is tightly coupled with your company strategy. And how does this all start? It starts first way at the top of what is the company's mission and vision. Why does a company exist in the first place? Second, well, what are your company core values and your operating principles? Because that helps to explain how you're going to actually do business and how you're going to engage with your employees and your customers and your prospects and your partners. But then once you understand your mission and your vision and your core values, then you have to be able to articulate what is your unique company story. And that company story is not the what and the how. It incorporates that too, but it's your why. It's what is your company's purpose? What is your why? What is the whole essence of the company and the reason that you exist? So you have your mission vision, you have your core value, you have your company story, and then this is how you start to communicate why you're different. What are your differentiated value propositions? And how should you engage with your ideal customer profile who actually cares about that? And then this flows down to how are you going to go to market and your sales motion and all the operational pieces. And so when I realized this and started talking to companies about this, they were, we don't actually have a framework for that. And so I decided to teach a course on go-to-market strategy and sales strategy. And I taught this course at University of Washington at the Foster School of Business MBAs. And then I had a number of CEOs and sales leaders who said, well, why are you only teaching this to MBAs? We can actually use this help as well. And that was the impetus of culture-driven sales. So culture-driven sales, sometimes people think, what is culture about in the culture-driven sales? But the culture is, if you want to actually drive sales, how are you integrating into your overall narrative and your sales motion the mission, the vision, the why, your company story in a way that it connects with other people? That's how do you drive the whole culture in? Because my belief is if you actually nail that culture piece that emotionally connects, that brings people in, you're going to drive a lot more sales than if you're just focused on the how and the what, which is all about data and facts and features and functions because it's important, but that's not what's going to drive people to make decisions, and it's not going to drive them to engage with you. And so
Yeah.
that's the impetus of culture-driven sales.
Yeah, thank you for describing the mission of your own firm, and gosh, that resonates so much with me. I used to have a joking phrase, but it actually comes from reality. Adobe acquired a company, and I had spoken to 10 different executives and got 10 different stories before I started working with them. And, it's just normal, that lack of alignment. And I love what culture-driven sales can do for a firm to create that type of alignment. And especially when you're involved, the momentum that's really going to bump performance. So fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit more then about why story. Why is it so critical for go-to-market and sales improvement? What do you have to say for us there?
I mean, Bruce, we just talked about this in a way, but people are just attracted to stories. It's the facts and it's the truth. Stories engage people. They engage other human beings. I mean, they help people to connect and to emotionally connect. They also help to convey the real meaning of what people are trying to say. And you can see this literally for generations. Think about how families pass down their traditions, how they pass down their family stories, how they pass down their recipes. They do this with stories. And this is how lessons are conveyed to children too. I mean, when you're trying to teach a young child something, rather than just tell them, do this, do that, you do this with stories. That's why there's books and there's Aesop's fables that are actually teaching moral stories and valuable lessons through these stories that the kids can relate to and that they can understand. And so, I mean, you can even think about this. Consider what you remember most. Take it out of business altogether. We go to a dinner party. And when you're at a dinner party and people are going around the table and talking, who is it that people want to listen to? Who is it that people gravitate to? It's the person that actually can engage in these stories where people just, they want to listen. They find it interesting and compelling and they're drawn in and then they remember that. And so people and companies often put tons of words together, but they don't land. They aren't memorable. People, though, do remember stories. They land. They emotionally connect. They're memorable, and this is what people remember. And this is true with the way that the brain is wired, too. There is tons of research on this that shows that the brain actually can process stories. It sets off the brain in a way that people listen and engage better. And so if you think about companies throwing all these facts and data, that's important, but the brain is not necessarily going to engage. There's also research that shows that people make decisions not only with rational thought, but with emotional thought. And stories are what are tapping into that emotional side of the brain. And so when companies are, or when people are making decisions about what to buy, they are making these decisions for emotional reasons. And this is all critical to sales. And if you want someone to buy your product, you need to think about how are you engaging with them in a way where they can hear you, they can remember you, they can emotionally connect and understand what you're doing. And this is
K-
all super, super important with stories.
Well, Kelly, let's talk about maybe set the table with a great story, just as an example.
I think this is something that at Tableau, we did very well. This was something that our CEO was absolutely fantastic at. And a lot of this comes back if I started as the first salesperson, employee number 10, 1 month before we launched version one. And when I started, the mission of the company at Tableau was to help people see and understand data. And that's still the mission now, and
Yeah.
I joined in 2005. And
Mhm.
so that kind of comes back to how do you have this overarching where everyone's very clear on the mission and vision and the overarching purpose. But then we also told the story. And we told the story in every pitch deck when we met with investors. We started off when we talked with customers. And the story was pretty short. It talked about the impetus and the founding story of Tableau. And what happened was at the Department of Defense had approached one of our founders, Pat Hanrahan, who was one of the founders of Pixar. He actually created the technology behind Pixar, and he was and still is a decorated computer scientist and professor at Stanford, and he has 3 Academy Awards for his work in visual graphics and visualization. And the Department of Defense came to him and said, "Hey, Pat, can you help solve one of the key business problems of the world today?" And that is that the whole world of databases and rows and columns of text is totally divorced and separated from the world of visual graphics and visualization. And there's all this science that shows that the brain and the eye actually can process data better, huge amounts of data when it's represented in pictures. And so, is there a way that you can help tie this together? And that is actually how Tableau got started. So, Pat ended up joining up with the lead PhD on the product, which was on the project at Stanford, who is Chris Stolte, and they developed this very interesting way to drag and drop visualization. And then they joined up with Christian Chabot, who is our CEO, and Stanford's very good at helping companies spin out. But the whole idea is, hey, people have tons of questions with their data. Is there a better and simpler way that we could leverage visualization and visual graphics to help people have a more interactive conversation with their data? And we started with this with everyone because it brought people in. It was a new approach to business intelligence. It was a new approach to how people thought about doing data analytics because everyone said, "Hey, I have questions." And there's tons of people in my organization who are not savvy with data and they have questions too. So if I can empower more people to be more self-service, to answer their own questions with data, then I'm very interested. And what this did is it drew in not only our prospects and our customers, but it actually attracted tons of employees who wanted to be part of this mission that we were doing to help people be able to be empowered to answer their own questions. And that was super compelling company story. So that was one example of a company story. I think a second story, if we go away from the company side though, is over the course, this is more of a personal thing. Over the course of my 30 plus years in sales and tech, I've done a lot of keynotes and a lot of speeches. And so when you're doing a keynote, it might be at a customer conference, it might be at some kind of a partner event, it could be a company kickoff or a sales kickoff. I kind of took an approach very early days. This will illustrate that I'm like hugely story person, but I thought, okay, I'm going to be giving a whole bunch of data and facts and talking about our results and talking about what our goals and priorities are, but I want people to actually listen and be engaged. So I tried to always weave in some kind of a personal story. And what I decided to do in these talks is weave in something with my kids of some kind of a lesson about leadership with my kids. And this was a very short bit. It would be 3 or 5 minutes in each hour-long talk. So I'd talk about when my son came to the office and he wanted to learn about sales. I would talk about some trip of some lesson that we had based on my kids. I would talk about taking my children to a movie and something that happened that we engaged with how people were interacting within the theater. And I'd tell these stories. And the interesting thing is still today, like over a decade later, when I run into someone who was in that room, they often will say to me, like it happened to me just recently. I ran into someone, this speech was like 15 years ago. And that person didn't remember what sales goals we were talking about or like what were the numbers on the screen, but they said, "Oh, your son that came to office that you told that story about wanting to do sales, like he's probably in college now. What is he doing? Is that what he wants to do? Does he want to go into business or do something else?" And so it lands. People remember it. They retain it. And that's how they connect with you even a long time later. So the power of stories, I think, is just evident in everything we do. And it's just human nature.
Yeah, I love what you just framed. Those are two beautiful examples of how you're connecting with your buyers and in a way that is extremely memorable, especially the Tableau, why story, if you would, the mission and the origin. So powerful for people wanting to be behind that and understanding, the rationale and the differentiation from that.
I just wanted to give you props for that because you were helpful in helping us to frame and articulate that story in a simple way where everyone could explain it, where we were aligned on it and it emotionally connected. So thank you to you years later for helping us to articulate that
Of
story.
course. Yeah, no, it's such a wonderful story and so grateful to be part of that. Well, Kelly, let's talk about how to improve sales performance with stories. And you already did illustrate with a couple of examples, but I'd love for you to help the audience kind of frame this, um, the different types of stories.
The first is the company story. So what is very interesting is oftentimes a company will bring me in and say, "Can you help us with our company story?" And they'll show me their narrative and they'll show me their customer pitch deck. And it's all about the what and the how. We've talked about that a lot. It's not very much about the why. It's all very tactical. And they'll have the salespeople go and they're leading with that. And they're saying, "Well, it's not as effective." And then I'll say, "Well, if you bring the CEO to the meeting, how does the CEO tell that story?" And then I'll go have a meeting with the CEO or I'll listen to one of the CEO's pitches and it's totally different. The CEO has this story that ties back to the company why and why they exist and why the founder started the company in the first place. And that is that emotionally connected story. So how are companies making sure not only everyone's aligned and not only that it's emotionally connected, but how are they communicating the story in a way where it actually draws in and helps people to understand that essence and the why? And that comes back to the company because people care. They want to do business with people that they're aligned with what your purpose and mission is and what you're all about. So that's the first, the company story. The second is customer stories. And this again, most companies do have customer stories. But if you go and you look at customer stories, much of customer stories are again about the what and the how. They're here's the customer's ROI, here's how they're using the product. This is how they got much more efficiency and effectiveness. And that's all really important. but it's not going to be compelling enough that your other customers and prospects are going to necessarily want to listen to all of that. And so if you think about the customer, and I have, in training, we used my late very good friend, unfortunately passed away, Skip Miller, always talked about the three levels of why. And most companies, when they go to their customer, they get to the first level of why. Why is this prospect calling you in the first place? Maybe they get to the second level of why, which is what is the meaningful difference that this is going to have on the company or the company's strategic goals. But what really matters if you can get to that third level of why, which is the individual motivation for that person. So for that customer as a human being, not that customer as a company, because it's people that buy companies, people that buy products, not
Yeah.
companies that buy product, but we're always trying to sell company to company. And if you think about these customer stories, and here's another example of a story of what we did at Tableau, is we went to all of our customers and asked them, why did they buy Tableau? And how did Tableau have an impact? And initially they wanted to talk about ROI and they saved money and they worked faster. But we tried to get to that third level of why. And we had our customers saying, I remember stories of one person said, I I have my son is on a little league team and I work so hard and I have so much work that I can never go to the games. And then I started using Tableau and Tableau helped me to do everything so much faster and so much more effectively. I was able to do what was taking me till 10 p.m. I was able to leave at 3 o'clock on those game days and still get my work done and go to those little league games. So I feel like Tableau has helped me to have a better relationship with my son. Or another example where the customer said, I've been trying to get a promotion and I've been saying we should do these things with data for so long and no one really listened. And then I started using Tableau, and Tableau has helped to drive our decision making in our company so much that I've actually had 3 promotions in just a short period of time that I've used Tableau. And so people got very emotionally engaged. And this is what we did with our customer stories. Of course, we talked about the ROI and how they were using it, but we got into the actual human essence of why that person cared, that bottom level of why, the individual motivations of the customer. And so I would ask for in your go to market team and in your marketing and your sales, are you actually using customer stories that they emotionally connect and they're driving a level of engagement and empathy that people are going to care? And it's not just about the data and facts. So that's the second level, which is the customer level.
Excellent. No, perfectly stated. How can you really resonate, connect, and engage emotionally at that, individual buyer level? That's really powerful. Well, let's talk about the third.
It's good for individuals when they're first interacting with the prospect or customer to actually tell their own personal story as to why they're working for this company in the first place, why they're passionate about this company's mission. And that is like, for instance, if you think about podcasts, all podcasts, what they're doing is they're trying to get people's personal stories, right? What is the story? And so the whole world operates in stories, but companies end up spending a lot of time and energy on their company story, maybe some on their customer story, but they don't actually invest in having their sales and marketers and the rest of their executive team understand how to actually tell their own personal story in a way where it fits in to the whole broader equation.
Absolutely. So many things to say about this one. I used to do a presentation, Kelly, called "Connect Before You Sell." Which is a little bit of a misnomer because you don't sell anything if you don't connect, and it goes hand in hand. But first connect, at a personal level, make sure there's some sort of a trust bond so you can move forward into some of the bigger dialogues that you're going to have together as part of that whole buying experience. But, the personal story really does help in creating that bond. As you say, even, with people coming back to you 15 years later, remembering your personal story about your kids at that point in time and checking in because they care because you created that bond from the stage or even from the one-to-one dialogues that you're having. But, the personal stories are the best at that, where you can tell common stories and figure out what your buyer believes in, what's important to them, what are they passionate about, and you're sharing yours, and you're looking for those points of connection through those personal stories.
Absolutely.
Well laid out. Well laid out. Well, so we've got our three types of stories. Why don't we talk a little bit more, Kelly, next about just how do you create these stories and integrate these stories into your go-to-market or sales motion?
Yes. Well, Bruce, as we've talked about, companies spend a lot of time and energy developing playbooks and stories, but there could be a lot more training and learning of how to be effective storytellers. So if you think about how companies engage their go-to-market teams, I mean, there's a whole bunch of trainings around it. You have, solution selling, spin selling, customer-centric selling, and then all these other sales philosophies and methodologies, MedPick, all these different things. But are people and companies actually spending enough time teaching storytelling? And so this goes back to one of the things that we had done when I was a leader is realize, well, maybe we should actually invest in storytelling. And so, and this goes back to time at Tableau, which is my longest tenure. I was there for 12 years as sales leader. And we went and told all of our sales leaders, all of our go to market leaders, 100% of our enterprise sellers that we were putting them through a storytelling workshop. And people thought this was crazy. Like, why are you spending money on storytelling? Can't you tell? Like, we're trying to get into enterprise selling more. Can you teach us more about this customer centric selling or whatever was the latest enterprise selling fad? We said, no, we're going to take a different approach and we're going to teach this storytelling. And so we brought everyone in the room, and a lot of that was, well, can you start off with a personal story? Tell us who you're about, how, like, why are you here? How do you tick? Tell us something about customer stories. We help to get everyone to understand how to tell a company story. And an interesting thing happened with this because if you're telling stories, you have to get personal. People were able to show much more vulnerability. But two interesting takeaways came from this. One is at the end of this whole session, we had a bunch of our salespeople that said, wow, this was super powerful. This is not only helping me to connect with my customers and prospects, this is helping me to better connect with my coworkers and my direct reports. It's helping me on a family level to connect better with my significant other and with my kids and my family members. Like, this has been profound and life changing. That was the first interesting takeaway, which was unexpected.
Hmm.
The second was oftentimes when I, as the sales leader, in the chief revenue officer type, was brought in to talk to our customers and our customer execs. It happened very frequently that these executives, who are our key buyers, said to me, hey, Kelly, I just have a question for you. Trying to understand, like, why is it that your salespeople seem to understand our what we're doing so much better? Like, we're dealing with tons of other of your competitors and other vendors, and they're trying to sell us all these different things. And I know you're trying to sell, but it seems like your team is understanding us on a different level. And I realize it's all coming back to the storytelling. People are starting with stories and they're developing a sense of trust, of openness, of vulnerability, where the prospect's able to open up in a way where maybe they weren't if we were just going back to the beginning, peppering them with questions. And so
Hmm.
I think that companies should be thinking, like, are they actually intentionally training how people can tell stories
Hmm.
instead of just walking through a pitch deck? So that's number one. of a really important how to.
Yeah, if I could anchor on that just for a little bit, what you're saying there, in my experience with Tableau and you, Kelly, is we were able to train everybody in the Tableau story, from chairman, to frontline, to even product development, et cetera. So it became whole company training, which was so impressive for people to be able to embrace that. And then, the way we crafted that story, as, it was being delivered to potential buyers, we were inside their mind. Kelly, I don't know if I mentioned to you, but when I was doing a bunch of testing of the story with Tableau customers, I would share some of the visuals, and that's also what made, the Tableau story so powerful. There were visuals to back it up and to help with that, the memory forming on behalf of the buyer. But when I'd show some of those visuals, they would just go, "Oh my gosh, that's us." We really got inside of their world in their mind, showing that current state visual around that. And if you can remember, it was around, the people dimension, the experience dimension, time dimension, but especially as it went to the experience, and we talked about the report factory. And I just, remember testing that. And then subsequently where customers like just going, "Oh my God, that's us." It's almost like, "How did you know?" And they would laugh a little bit sheepishly, but talk about a connection point, just really meeting them where they're at.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, I think this brings up another point too. Like the whole world of sales and how companies buy is evolving in a very big way. We're seeing a massive, massive transformation. So I think that let's talk about that just for a moment. It used to be when companies were selling, they needed their marketing team and their salespeople to give the large volume of information about whatever that product was. But the world has changed. There's so much information out there on the web. And there's now you have AI that is giving all kinds of information. There's tons of competitors. There's lots of data that's available. And so your prospects and your customers are very well versed, probably when they come to you. They already know 70 or 80% of what you historically would have taught them along the way. They've already done the research themselves. And so they're coming to you to say, "Hey, I'm trying to decide which company I'm going to go to, which solution I'm going to use." And they're already very knowledgeable and well-versed in whatever it is that you're selling. And so what they're looking for is they're looking for not only someone that they can trust and someone that's going to help them to achieve their ROI, but they're also looking for a vendor that's going to help teach them and provide some thought leadership so that they can be challenged and listen and learn along the way. And so this is a whole different element of stories because companies often we're all talking about this is what we do and very vendor centric. And that's not effective anyway because people don't want to hear like all about the vendor. But it's changed and become even more important that thought leadership is very, very critical. And so if you think about a customer saying, well, what is the state of the status quo? What's the problem and the challenge to the status quo? And what is it that would help them to break out of the status quo in a way where they could actually be better? Think about it of going to the desired state or to the promised state. And then they're looking for companies to help lead and guide, to paint a narrative of not only what their company is about, but how you're going to help teach and bring and lead that company to this promised desired state. And that is all about framing this narrative in a storytelling in this thought leadership way. So I think what companies can think about when they're thinking about their narrative, their go to market approach, stories, it's not only, well, what are our company story and our customer story and the personal story? What are the stories in a way that can emotionally connect? That's number one. Number two is how do we actually train our team to be more skilled in storytelling? Because storytelling, I mean, if you think about it, you go look at your best salespeople. Almost always, your best salespeople are your best communicators, and your best communicators are fantastic storytellers. So, communication and storytelling and emotionally connecting is all that. So, the second is how do you train them? But then you also have this third piece when you think about the how is How are you creating thought leadership and a narrative of telling a story of how you want to guide and lead and bring your customers to this new desired state? And that is a company story that is related to your company story, but it's a slightly different. And so you should be asking, how skilled is your team on thought leadership and telling those thought leadership stories? So those are the three how to that I think are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And should we talk about, where that comes from a little bit in terms of how to craft the story? I thought that could be interesting. Well, where does the thought leadership and where does that narrative come from?
Mm. I think a lot of that, Bruce, goes back to this whole the thought leadership is tied to the narrative. So you have your mission, vision, differentiated value proposition. And this is a lot. I mean, this is a whole impetus of what I teach in culture driven sales. This is basically like what my course is and what the framework is and the thought leadership of this. It is, you want to understand from your prospects, what is the current state of affairs? Like where are they in right now? And what is frustrating and challenging to them in that current state? And if they were to look at this current state, then where is it that they want to go? So this is what I was talking about. What is the desired state? What is the place they want to be? And then there's a gap. There's a gap between the current status quo and the desired state. This is why they're talking to you in the first place. If they didn't care and they didn't have this challenge, they wouldn't even be engaged in your company to solve a problem. But
Mhm.
rather than just talk about, here's all these features and functions and ROI and data to get you from here to there, what you actually want to do is you want to understand, well, what are the biggest challenges with the current state? And then you know what your company is super good at. And then you need to figure out, what are your unique, differentiated value propositions. So companies should have maybe 3 to 5. Some companies have 25 value propositions. It's way too many. And oftentimes people will have value propositions that all of their other competitors have. So they're not differentiated at all. So you want to think in a unique and differentiated way. What are the 3 to 5 most important differentiated values you have? And then you do this in a thought leadership way where you're marrying it together. So you say, what are the challenges with the current state? And you want to get out of the current state and get to the desired state, where your biggest challenges are these 4 things. And then those 4 things exactly map with our value propositions. So to give you an example of that, and since we've been talking about Tableau, go back to Tableau, like the biggest challenge that people had was time. It took people way, way, way too long. And if you look at the other things that they had, it took too long. It was too complicated. So you had to have a very, very skilled computer scientist or data scientist to do it. And it took way too many resources for them. So you had to have whole teams taking huge amount of time, but it actually drew them away from other important stuff. So there were some other things, but when you think about that, if you said, well, people doing data analytics is taking too much time, it's taking way too highly specialized people, and of those people, it's taking way too much of those people's resources. Well, what Tableau did is it created this self-service where people could do what was taking weeks and months in literally minutes and hours. It was a self-service, so it empowered everyone to be a data worker, where you didn't have to be a specialized data scientist to do it. You could have anyone who is in recruiting or sales or marketing or product be able to answer their own questions. And 3, it freed up these really complex resources that you wanted them to be able to be doing more complicated tasks, that you freed up all their time. So it freed up all these resources. And what that did is we were able to put a thought leadership around where we told our company story. We were able to tell a picture of the status quo. We were able to explain this, what the desired state was. And then we were able to come up with very differentiated, unique value propositions where we could make this claim knowing that our competitors couldn't touch us with a 10-foot pole on that. And so that's the kind of thought leadership you want to be thinking. How can you teach them and guide them in the future and then tie that back to your company story and narrative that makes you very differentiated?
Oh, perfect, perfect. Well, let's talk about some of the traps and pitfalls to avoid when crafting these amazing stories. Do you want to go first, or?
Well, do you have anything that you want to start with?
Well, yeah, I would. Typically, we did talk about either delegating it down or delegating it out, to try to work on a story. And with the Tableau story, I can remember it like it was yesterday. But, we all got into a, wonderful hotel room at the time and just batted ideas around. Kelly, I don't know if you were there personally. There was probably about 25 people there, and from product development, from sales, from marketing, and we were just getting ideas on the table. Which was fantastic for a few different reasons. A lot of those ideas were excellent, but B, the revenue team effectively was uniting and working towards this common goal of having a really compelling story. So that level of involvement is unlike things I typically see, where it gets delegated down or out, and then it sometimes it comes back really good. Oftentimes it doesn't, or most often it doesn't, but sometimes it comes back really good, but then it goes onto the shelf or the digital shelf, if you would, and nobody uses it. But in Tableau's instance, everybody effectively had a hand in creating the narrative and owning it over time, which was really special.
Yeah, Bruce, I completely agree with you. I think if let's go over some of the traps and pitfalls. The first, I would 100% agree with you that be careful about not delegating down or out, because when you think about a company story, remember a company story is not just a messaging playbook. It is your company story is tightly integrated with your go-to-market strategy, and this all threads back to your mission, your vision, your purpose, the why, which is your company story. And you need to make sure everyone on your executive team, everyone on your board is completely aligned by that. Otherwise, you might have a story that sounds really good, but it's not going to land, it's not going to drive alignment, and it's not gonna be used.
Mhm.
So you need to make sure that you have, it's an having a company story is an executive level top priority. So that's the
Yeah.
first. I think 2 is companies don't focus enough on the why. And a lot of that is because it's much easier to do the what and the how. It's easy to say, this is what we do. Here are our features. Here are our functions. Here are our benefits. This is how we implement. And it's actually really hard to put everyone in a room to figure out how are you going to tell a story? How are you going to convey a mission where it's short, it's succinct, it's powerful, it's engaging, it emotionally connects? It's it's very hard. It's one of the hardest parts about coming up with the whole go to market and marketing and sales strategy. And so because it's hard and it requires people sitting in a room for a long period of time talking about what words evoke the right emotions, what what, um, what are the feelings you want people to think? How are you gonna actually engage in in a connected type of way? It's not the way people usually think when we're working so fast on an operational tactical way. And so many companies just bypass it. I mean, I've been at companies, I've done a lot of advising, and oftentimes they'll say, "Hey, Kelly, I understand that you think mission and vision and company story is all important. We are moving so fast, we literally don't have time. So
Ah,
we're gonna bypass that and we'll come back at some point in the future." And I'm like, but you brought me in to help drive alignment on your executive team to help you figure out how you're gonna grow faster and increase sales. And you're saying it's not important? to have a holistic company story. Like, what else could be more important? And so I think they're just kind of missing the point. So that is a huge other tactical pitfall. So the first is don't delegate it. Two, you have to make time to understand and communicate the
Yeah.
why instead of the what and the how. And I think the third, and we've talked about this before, is you actually have to invest in how people tell the story. You can't just say, hey, we just
Yeah.
developed this story and now I have a pitch deck and everyone just go to it. That's the third. And actually, I'll add a fourth. The fourth is you have to do periodic checking of asking all of your salespeople, asking your marketing, asking your executive team, what is your story? And if you ask 10 people and you get 10 different stories, then you have work to do. And
Yeah,
I'll
that
tell
didn't
you,
work.
like, it's more than 50% of the time. It could be 70, 80, even more percent of the time that you asked 10 different people and you might not get 10 different answers, but you get more than 5 different answers, and then it's just not going to work. So that's another
Yeah.
pitfall.
Yeah. No, I love it. No, I think we did that really well. And then I think we just need to move towards final thoughts. This has been so rich. Any other thing that you'd love the audience to walk away with, Kelly?
Hmm. I think I would challenge each of you, whether it is how you're engaging with your prospects and customers, how you're talking to your peers at work and your direct reports, or even think about how you're engaging with people and communicating in your personal life. Just track yourself for the day or for the week. Are you using stories? And if you're not, try to integrate them and see if you notice a difference. Like, are people engaging better when you use stories? And of course, the answer is going to be yes. So, are you peppering with questions instead of stories? If so, tweak it and just see how you can, whether you're doing an intro, you're doing a speech, you're doing a one-on-one, try to thread in those stories, because remember, the best salespeople and the best communicators, and I would say the best leaders and the best employees, they're the ones that know how to have empathetic two-way communication, and they are going to be fantastic storytellers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's talk about just you did lay out stories should be a top priority for any executive team, and you got to get that right. That drives alignment and go to market success. How can people reach out to you for that type of support, Kelly?
Oh, perfect. Well, I would love to connect with as many of you as possible. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just go search for Kelly Breslin Wright and Culture Driven Sales. You can also find me on my website, which is www.culturedrivensales.com. On that site, there's a bunch of articles. There's a series of different podcasts. I also do executive seminars that help companies to understand who are we and why do we exist, walking through how to have an effective integrated go-to-market strategy. So if your company is interested in that, whether it is for your company internally or for venture capital funds or PE firms, if they want to bring a collection of different executives from different companies together, I offer seminars on all of that. But most importantly, just use your stories, and I'd love to hear from you. So reach out on LinkedIn or on my site.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you, Kelly. Thanks for all this wisdom, all this practical wisdom on just embracing the power of stories. Really appreciate it.
And thank you, Bruce, to one of the main pros in the worlds of storytelling. So thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Thank you. What an insightful conversation with Kelly. She gave us a masterclass in the art of storytelling and sales. She covered the importance of anchoring your company's mission and vision within your company story, how to craft compelling customer stories that emotionally connect and engage, and last but not least, she taught us how to harness the power of our own personal narratives. Her experiences, from selling books door to door to scaling some of the most successful SaaS companies, are a testament to the transformative power of stories in connecting with buyers and driving improved sales performance. Remember, your stories aren't just about products or services, they're about building trust, creating emotional connections, and aligning on shared values. If you're looking to elevate your sales game or transform your team's approach to storytelling, be sure to check out Culture Driven Sales for more insights from Kelly. And thanks for tuning in to the Value Pro Show. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who needs a little storytelling inspiration. And until next time, keep delivering the value your buyers love.